Before dawn on June 6, 1944, the German High Command was staring at the wrong beach because a magician had convinced them it was real. Rubber tanks, fake radio chatter, phantom armies that didn't exist, and one of the most important military lies ever told. If you enjoy deeply human war stories like this, consider subscribing. In the spring of 1944, the war in Europe had reached a breaking point. Nazi Germany was being crushed from the east by the Red Army, city by city, village by village. In the west, everyone knew the Allies were coming. The only question was where. Adolf Hitler was obsessed with the idea of an Allied landing. He'd ordered the Atlantic Wall built, miles of concrete bunkers, artillery positions, mines and steel obstacles stretching along the European coastline. But resources were limited. Germany couldn't defend every beach equally. Choices had to be made, and the most logical choice was Pas de Calais. It was the narrowest point between Britain and France, closest to English airfields, ideal for supply lines. German planners and Hitler himself believed that had to be the invasion site. Normandy, with its wide tidal flats and fewer ports, seemed like a feint at best. The Allies knew this belief existed, and instead of trying to correct it, they decided to weaponize it. Deep inside Allied planning rooms, a deception plan began to take shape. It wasn't just about misleading German generals. It was about hijacking how they thought, their expectations, their fears, their logic. The operation was called Fortitude, and its most audacious element would soon earn a nickname that sounded almost ridiculous for wartime: the Ghost Army. This wasn't a typical military unit. Many of its members weren't career soldiers at all. They were artists, set designers, sculptors, sound engineers, men who, in another life, would have been painting billboards or designing theater stages. Instead, they were handed a different assignment: convince the German army that an entire invasion force existed when it didn't. Inflatable tanks were rolled out, eerily convincing from the air. Rubber Sherman tanks, fake trucks, fake artillery, even fake landing craft positioned along the southeastern English coast. From reconnaissance planes thousands of feet above, they looked real enough to trigger reports, photographs, and intelligence briefings. But visuals alone weren't enough, so the Ghost Army added sound. Massive speakers were mounted on trucks, broadcasting recorded noises of troop movements, engines revving, metal planking, soldiers shouting orders. At night, these sounds drifted across the countryside, picked up by German listening posts and resistance informants, who unknowingly passed along exactly what the Allies wanted them to hear. Then came the radios. Fake units transmitted constant chatter, the kind of mundane, repetitive communication real armies produce. Requests for supplies, complaints about equipment, training schedules, all carefully scripted to feel authentic. On paper, a massive force was assembling, a force commanded by General George Patton, the Allies' most aggressive and feared tank commander. To German intelligence, Patton leading an army aimed straight at Pas de Calais made perfect sense. And that was the genius of it. The deception didn't ask the Germans to believe something new, it reinforced what they already believed. Inside German headquarters, reports stacked up. Recon photos showed tanks, radio intercepts confirmed troop movements. Agents, some of whom had been turned by the Allies without knowing it, echoed the same story. An invasion was coming. Not yet, but soon, and it would hit Pas de Calais. As a result, German divisions were ordered to stay put. Panzer units were held back as a mobile reserve. Hitler himself insisted they remain ready for the real landing, convinced Normandy would be nothing more than a diversion. On June 6th, when Allied troops stormed the beaches of Normandy under fire, German commanders hesitated. This didn't look like the main invasion. It looked wrong, too chaotic, too risky, too far west. And so the Ghost Army's greatest trick reached its most dangerous phase. Because the lie had worked almost too well, moments like this changed history, hit like. So this story reaches more people. Even as reports flooded in from Normandy, German high command waited. Surely this was the feint. Surely the real blow was still coming at Pas de Calais. Surely Patton's army would appear any moment. Hours passed, then days, and still German reinforcements stayed frozen in place, guarding a beach that would never be attacked. By the time the truth became undeniable, Allied troops had secured their foothold. The beaches were held. Supplies were pouring in. The liberation of Western Europe had begun, not just with bullets and blood, but with sound effects, rubber, and one perfectly told lie. But inside the Ghost Army itself, the tension was far from over. Because if the deception cracked too early, the consequences would be catastrophic. The men of the Ghost Army knew their work wasn't finished when the first Allied boots hit Normandy. In fact, those next few days were the most dangerous of all. If the Germans realized they'd been fooled, they could still rush armored divisions south and crush the beachhead before it fully stabilized. So the illusion had to continue, even after the real invasion had already begun. Across southern England, the fake army stayed alive. Inflatable tanks were repositioned. Dummy camps remained active. Radio operators kept transmitting endless streams of believable chatter. Patton himself, very much alive and very visible, stayed in England on purpose, allowing German intelligence to confirm that he was still preparing something massive. To German analysts, this only reinforced their certainty. Normandy wasn't the main event, it was bait, and Hitler agreed. Inside his bunker, the Führer clung to the idea that Pas de Calais was the true objective. He personally forbade several armoured divisions from moving toward Normandy without his direct approval that never came in time. This hesitation was fatal. While German commanders argued and waited, Allied engineers built roads, medics treated the wounded, infantry pushed inland hedgerow by hedgerow. Every hour bought by the Ghost Army translated into lives saved on the beaches and momentum gained inland. For the artists and sound technicians behind the deception, this was a strange kind of warfare. They weren't firing weapons, they weren't storming bunkers, but they understood the stakes better than most. If a German reconnaissance flight flew too low, if a captured soldier talked too much, if a single detail felt off, the spell could break. Some Ghost Army units were even deployed on the continent itself after D-Day, continuing their work closer to the front lines. They projected fake divisions where none existed, drawing enemy fire away from real units. In several cases, German artillery bombarded empty fields for hours, firing at nothing but shadows and sound. When the war finally ended in Europe, the impact of the deception became clearer. German records confirmed what Allied planners had hoped. Significant forces had remained locked in Pas de Calais for weeks after D-Day, waiting for an invasion that would never come. Those troops could have altered the early days in Normandy. They could have made the landings far bloodier. They could have pushed the Allies back into the sea. They never got the chance. And yet, when the Ghost Army returned home, there were no parades, no medals pinned in public ceremonies, no interviews. Their work was classified. For decades, many of these men couldn't even tell their families what they'd done in the war. Artists went back to studios. Sound engineers returned to radio and film. Some became famous in their fields. Others lived quiet lives, carrying a secret that had helped change the course of history. It wasn't until long after the war that the full story began to emerge of how deception, creativity, and an understanding of human psychology outmaneuvered brute force. The Ghost Army proved something unsettling and profound. Wars aren't won by strength alone. They're won by perception, by belief, by convincing the enemy to defend the wrong beach. Share this story with someone who thinks World War II outcomes were inevitable. Because sometimes history turns not on generals or guns, but on a perfectly told lie, and the people clever enough to sell it. By the time Allied armies broke out of Normandy and raced across France, the Ghost Army's greatest achievement was already behind them, and almost no one knew it. German commanders, interrogated after the war, repeatedly returned to the same admission. They had been certain that Pas de Calais was the real target, certain that Patton's Phantom Army was waiting, certain that Normandy was a trap. And certainty in war can be deadlier than ignorance. The deception didn't just delay German reinforcements, it fractured their decision-making. Field commanders hesitated, unsure whether they were reacting to reality or walking into another Allied trick. Orders were second-guessed, opportunities slipped away. Even as Allied forces liberated Paris, German units remained stranded, guarding empty coastline, defending beaches that would never hear a single landing craft. When the truth finally became undeniable, it was already too late. The Ghost Army was officially disbanded in late 1945, its members scattered back into civilian life, carrying a strange burden. The knowledge that they had helped win a war using lies so convincing that millions of lives may have depended on them, and no one could ever know. Only decades later were their records declassified. Only then did the world learn that some of the most important battles of World War II were never fought at all. They were staged, scripted, Youths that never fired a shot, speakers that never fired a shell, artists who never pulled a trigger, but still stood on the front lines of history. The Ghost Army reminds us that war is not only about courage and sacrifice, but about imagination, about understanding how fear works, how expectations harden into blind spots, how even the most powerful armies can be undone by believing exactly what they want to believe. On June 6, 1944, thousands of young men stormed the beaches of Normandy, facing real bullets, real fire, and very real death. But behind them, quietly, invisibly, stood a handful of magicians, holding the enemy's gaze just long enough to change the world.